The church doors slammed shut as I reached them, the heavy wood vibrating through my palms. Inside, the organ swelled. The service had already started. A security guard stepped in front of me, hand raised. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You can't go in." I opened my mouth to speak, and then I heard my mother's voice through the door. "If she shows up, escort her out." The lock clicked. That sound hit harder than the news that my father was dead. I stood there on the stone steps, dressed in the black dress I'd bought specifically for this day, holding the eulogy I'd written at 3 a.m. Around me, late arrivals hurried past, glancing at me with uncomfortable recognition before quickly looking away. My Aunt Claire walked by without meeting my eyes. My cousin Thomas actually crossed to the other side of the walkway. People I'd known my entire life suddenly couldn't see me. The guard shifted his weight awkwardly. "You're not on the approved list, ma'am." Approved, as if grief required permission, as if love needed authorization. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. The message was from my mother. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." I read it 3 times, each word feeling more impossible than the last. Harder than what? Harder than locking your daughter out of her own father's funeral? Behind the doors, I could hear the minister's voice beginning the service. People were singing. They were mourning my father while I stood outside like a stranger. I tried the door handle once more. Locked solid. The security guard looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "I'm just doing what I was told, ma'am. I'm sorry for your loss." My loss. He had no idea. I wanted to scream. I wanted to bang on those doors until my hands bled. I wanted to demand answers, to force my way inside, to claim my right to say goodbye. But I didn't. Something inside me went completely still. Cold. Calculating. I turned and walked back down the steps, my heels clicking against the stone with perfect precision. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I moved with the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. People were still arriving, still filing past me. None of them stopped. My name is Hannah Whitmore. I'm 32 years old. I work as a senior logistics coordinator at Freeman Transport Solutions, where I've spent the last 8 years managing supply chains and solving problems nobody else wants to touch. I'm good at my job because I'm good at seeing patterns, at anticipating obstacles, at finding solutions when systems break down. I am also my father's eldest daughter, his first child, the one who inherited his stubborn jaw and his habit of overthinking everything. And on that Tuesday morning in October, I was erased from his funeral like I'd never existed at all. I drove away from that church with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind already moving through possibilities. The grief was there, massive and suffocating, but I pushed it down, locked it away. I'd learned that skill from my mother, actually. How to compartmentalize. How to function when your world is falling apart. I'd grieve later. Right now, I needed to think. Because my mother had made a mistake. A big one. She thought she could control everything. She always had. But she'd forgotten something important. I was my father's daughter in more ways than one. 3 days earlier, I'd been sitting at my desk, reviewing freight invoices and arguing with a supplier about delayed shipments, when my stepfather called. "Hannah," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Your dad passed this morning." I remember the exact moment. The way the fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. The way my pen rolled off my desk and clattered to the floor. The way everything went silent except for the buzzing in my ears. What happened? I managed to ask. Heart attack. He was at home. It was quick. Quick. As if that made it better. As if the speed of death mattered when the result was the same. I sat there staring at my computer screen, at the spreadsheet full of numbers that suddenly meant nothing at all. My father was dead. The man who taught me to ride a bike, who helped me with calculus homework, who called every Sunday just to check in. Gone. I called my mother immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring. "We're handling arrangements," she said, her voice perfectly composed. You don't need to get involved. At the time, I thought she meant logistics. Funeral homes, obituaries, the thousand small decisions that come with death. I was wrong. My parents had divorced when I was 19. It had been quiet but brutal. Not screaming matches or thrown dishes, just the slow, grinding dissolution of two people who'd grown to hate each other. My mother framed it as survival, as finally escaping a man who held her back, who never appreciated her, who couldn't understand what she needed. My father treated it like a loss, like grief. He never spoke badly about her, never tried to turn us against her. He just withdrew into his photography and his woodworking and his small, careful life. I stayed close to him. Weekly breakfasts at the diner on Morrison Street. Long drives through the countryside. The kind of relationship that doesn't need proving because it simply is. My mother never liked that. She wanted loyalty to be exclusive. Picking her meant not picking him. In her mind, there were no neutral zones. She liked control, appearances, order, and funerals were all three. So when she said, "We're handling it," what she meant was, "I'm handling it. Without you." I stood in the parking lot, watching people filter out of the church after the service ended. They looked uncomfortable, uncertain. Some tried to smile at me sympathetically. Most just hurried to their cars. My younger sister Brianna finally came outside. She was 28, married with 2 kids. She'd always been closer to our mother, softer, more willing to bend. She walked toward me slowly, her black dress wrinkled, her mascara smudged. "Hannah," she said quietly. I waited. She said, "You'd complicate things." Complicate. I nodded slowly, that word settling into my chest like a stone. In our family, complicate always meant disobedient, difficult, unwilling to fall in line. "What things?" I asked. Brianna looked away. "Just things. The service. The arrangements." She wanted it to be simple. "Simple," I repeated. "Please don't be angry with me." I tried to talk to her. I believed her. Brianna had always tried. But trying and succeeding were different things, and nobody succeeded at changing our mother's mind once it was made up. "It's okay," I told her, because it wasn't her fault. None of this was. She hugged me quickly, desperately, then pulled away and left. My Aunt Patricia brushed past me as the crowd thinned. She was my father's younger sister, a woman who'd never particularly liked my mother but had always been too polite to say so. She gripped her purse tightly, her knuckles white. "This isn't what your father wanted," she murmured, not quite looking at me. Then she was gone, disappearing into the parking lot before I could respond. That was the moment everything shifted, when my grief crystallized into something sharper, more focused. My father had wanted me there. Of course he had. He would have wanted all of us there together, despite everything. He'd always believed in forgiveness, in second chances, in family. But my mother had taken that choice away. Not just from me, from him. I got in my car and drove, not toward home, but toward the house where my father had lived alone for the past 13 years. The small ranch house on Oakmont Drive with the blue shutters and the garden he'd tended obsessively. I still had a key. He'd given it to me years ago, insisting I keep it even though I rarely used it. Today I would. The house smelled like him. Coffee and sawdust and the lavender air freshener he bought because it reminded him of his mother. I stood in the entryway, breathing it in, feeling the weight of his absence press against my chest. The place looked wrong. Stripped. Drawers in the kitchen hung open, emptied. File cabinets in his office stood bare. His desk, usually cluttered with woodworking magazines and bills and random notes, was cleared completely. Someone had been here, recently, going through his things, taking what they wanted, erasing evidence of his life. I walked through slowly, documenting everything with my phone. Empty spaces where photo albums used to sit, missing files from his cabinet, his laptop gone from the desk, but they'd missed something. In his office, There was a framed photograph of the two of us from a fishing trip 5 years ago. We stood on a dock, holding up a bass he'd caught, both of us grinning like idiots. I remembered what he'd told me that day, leaning close and whispering conspiratorially. If anything ever happens to me, check behind this photo. Important stuff. I'd laughed it off then. Dad, you're 53. Nothing's happening to you. Now, my hand shook as I lifted the frame off the wall. Taped to the back was a folded piece of paper, sealed in a plastic bag to protect it. I peeled the tape away carefully and pulled out the document. It was thick, official-looking. The letterhead read Greenwood Memorial Cemetery. A burial plot deed. Purchased 12 years ago. Plot number 47B in the eastern section, beneath the oak trees he'd always loved. My eyes scanned down to the ownership line. Registered owner, Hannah Marie Whitmore. My name. Not his. Not my mother's. Mine. At the bottom, in his distinctive handwriting, he'd written a note. Hannah has final authority over all burial decisions. This is my wish. Love, Dad. The date was from 8 years ago, right after I'd graduated college and started my first real job. I sat down on the floor, my back against his desk, staring at this piece of paper that suddenly meant everything. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known that something like this might happen, that my mother might try to control even this, his death, his final resting place. So he'd protected me, given me authority, made sure I couldn't be pushed aside. The grief I'd been holding back crashed over me then. I cried sitting on that floor, clutching the deed, understanding finally what my aunt had meant. Now everything made sense. If I'd been inside that church, I could have stopped whatever my mother had planned. I could have asked questions, demanded answers, asserted my legal rights. So she didn't just block me from the funeral. She removed the problem entirely. Out of sight meant out of the equation. If I wasn't there, I couldn't interfere. And by the time I found out what she decided, it would already be done. Except she didn't know about the deed. My father had kept it secret, this final gift. This insurance policy against control. I sat there for another hour, just breathing, thinking, planning. The logistics coordinator in me started mapping out scenarios, legal processes, documentation requirements, timeline considerations. Then I stood up, folded the deed carefully, and put it in my purse. I didn't confront my mother. I didn't call my sister. I didn't demand explanations or apologies. I went home, made tea, and waited for Monday morning. Because I'd learned something important in my 8 years of supply chain management. Emotional reactions lose battles. Documentation wins wars. That weekend passed in a blur of silence. My phone rang constantly. Family members wanting to check in. Friends offering condolences. My mother texting vague messages about getting together soon to discuss things. I ignored all of it. I spent Saturday researching cemetery law and burial rights. I spent Sunday organizing my father's papers and backing up the deed to 3 different cloud storage services. I ate mechanical meals. I slept in short, broken intervals. I functioned. On Monday morning, I called into work and took a personal day. Then I showered, dressed in my most professional outfit, and drove to Greenwood Memorial Cemetery. The administration office was small, tucked behind the main chapel. A woman in her 50s sat behind a desk covered in paperwork. I need to place a temporary hold on plot 47B, I said, my voice perfectly steady. She typed the number into her computer, then paused. Her eyes flicked up to me. May I ask your relationship to the plot owner? I slid the deed across her desk. I am the owner. She read the document slowly, carefully. Then she looked up at me with new understanding in her eyes. I see. Yes, Ms. Whitmore, you certainly can place a hold. May I ask the reason? My father recently passed away. There's been some confusion about burial arrangements. I need to ensure no decisions are made without my approval. She nodded sympathetically. I'm so sorry for your loss. Let me make a note in the system. As of today, no activities can proceed regarding this plot without written authorization from you personally. Thank you. Is there anything else I can help you with? Actually, yes. Can you tell me if anyone has contacted you about using this plot? She typed again, scrolling through records. A Mrs. Victoria Whitmore called last Friday. She was inquiring about availability and pricing for a cremation burial. Cremation. My father had been crystal clear his entire life. No cremation. Ever. He wanted to be buried whole, in the ground, where he could return to the earth properly, as he always said. Did she schedule anything? I asked. She was going to call back today with a decision. I smiled tightly. That won't be necessary anymore. My phone started ringing before I even reached my car. First my mother, then my stepfather, then Brianna, then my brother James, who I hadn't heard from in 6 months. I let them all go to voicemail. The text started immediately after. Mom, what did you do? James, you're going too far. Stepfather, call us now. This is ridiculous. Brianna, please just talk to Mom. She's really upset. I turned my phone on silent and drove home. That evening, I listened to the voicemails. My mother's voice progressed from confused to angry to something that almost sounded like panic. Hannah, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this needs to stop. Call me immediately. This is completely unnecessary. Your father wouldn't want this conflict. You're being selfish and cruel. Think about what this is doing to the family. I deleted each message after listening. Then I blocked her number. Not forever. Just for now. Just until I was ready. Because I'd learned something else from supply chain management. You can't negotiate effectively when you're being bombarded with pressure. Sometimes you need to control the flow of information. That night, Brianna showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't answer the door, but I saw her through the peephole, alone, looking exhausted. I let her in. She sat on my couch, twisting her hands together. They were going to cremate him, she said quietly. I waited. Mom said burial was unnecessary, expensive. That Dad wouldn't care because he'd be gone anyway. She looked up at me, tears in her eyes. But that's not true, is it? He did care. He was very clear about it, I said. No cremation. He wanted to be buried at Greenwood, under the oak trees. I didn't know that. Mom did. Brianna closed her eyes. She said it was for the best. That cremation was simpler, more modern. That we could keep his ashes or scatter them somewhere meaningful. But that's not what he wanted. No. Her voice broke. I should have asked more questions. I should have checked. But she was so certain and I trusted her. I sat down beside her. It's not your fault. Isn't it? I knew you should have been at the funeral. I knew it was wrong. But I didn't fight for you. I took her hand. You tried. That's more than most people did. She cried then, and I held her, and for a moment we were just sisters, mourning our father together. 2 days later, I got a call from Thompson Funeral Home. The director, Mr. Barnes, asked if I could come in for a meeting. Your mother has requested we schedule this discussion, he said carefully, to resolve some disagreements about final arrangements. I agreed to meet Thursday afternoon. The funeral home smelled like lemon cleaner and lilies. Forced calm, manufactured peace. My mother sat in Mr. Barnes's office already, my stepfather beside her. She looked composed, professional, every hair in place. She didn't greet me when I walked in. Mr. Barnes looked uncomfortable. Thank you both for coming. I understand there's been some confusion about Mr. Whitmore's burial wishes. There's no confusion, my mother said crisply. We've decided on cremation. Hannah has interfered with that process. I set my purse on the table and pulled out the deed. This isn't about interference. It's about legal authority. Mr. Barnes took the document, read it thoroughly, then read it again. I see, he said slowly. This is quite clear. Ms. Hannah Whitmore has final decision-making authority regarding the burial plot and all related arrangements. My mother's face went rigid. That can't be right. I'm afraid it is, Mrs. Whitmore. This deed is legally binding and properly registered with the cemetery. The director turned to me. Ms. Whitmore, as the plot owner, you have complete authority over burial decisions. What would you like to proceed with? Traditional burial, I said, in accordance with my father's clearly stated wishes. No cremation. My mother's composure cracked. This is absurd. You can't just. Actually, she can, Mr. Barnes interrupted gently. She has legal authority. I'm his wife. Ex-wife, I corrected quietly. You divorced him 13 years ago. She turned on me, eyes blazing. You always needed control, just like your father. Always difficult, always questioning everything. I met her gaze steadily. You locked me out of his funeral. She looked away first. You blocked me from saying goodbye to my own father because you knew I'd ask questions. You knew I'd object to cremation because I actually knew what he wanted. So you eliminated the problem. That's not. You sent security to keep me out. You told our entire family not to acknowledge me. You erased me from his death like I didn't matter. The room went very quiet. Mr. Barnes cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a moment. No, I said. We're done here. I'll handle the burial arrangements directly. Send all bills to me. I stood and walked out. My mother tried every angle after that meeting. She called the cemetery directly. They referred her to me. She contacted a lawyer to challenge the deed. He told her it was ironclad. She had my stepfather call me, attempting to negotiate. I didn't answer. She sent Brianna and James to plead her case. I told them the same thing. Dad wanted burial, not cremation. I'm honoring his wishes. Can't you just compromise? James asked, split the ashes, bury some? No, I said, because that's not what he wanted, and compromising on someone's final wishes isn't compromise. It's betrayal. Word spread through the family. People took sides. My mother's friends rallied around her, calling me vindictive and controlling. My father's side of the family quietly supported me, sending messages of thanks. Aunt Patricia called me directly. Your father would be proud of you, she said. He always worried about what Victoria would do. That's why he gave you the deed. Did he tell you about it? He mentioned it once years ago. Said he needed to protect his final wishes from interference. I didn't understand then. I do now. That conversation stayed with me. My father had known, had predicted this, had taken steps to ensure his daughter could fight for him when he couldn't fight for himself. I didn't cancel the burial arrangements my mother had tried to make. I postponed them. Then I scheduled a second memorial service. A real one. One I would attend. One that would honor who my father actually was, not who my mother wanted people to think he was. I booked a small chapel at Greenwood Cemetery for 3 weeks out. I contacted people my father actually cared about. His hiking club, his woodworking group, his photography buddies, old friends from college. I invited everyone except my mother. When she found out, the calls turned desperate. You can't do this, she said when she finally got through to me. You can't just exclude family. I learned from the best, I replied. Hannah, please. I know I made mistakes, but this is cruel. Is it? Because I seem to remember standing outside a church while my father's funeral happened without me. Was that cruel? Silence. You made your choice, I continued. You chose control over compassion. You chose appearances over truth. Those were your decisions. These are mine. I'm his wife. I was married to him for 24 years. And you spent 13 years after that barely acknowledging his existence. I spent those same years having breakfast with him every week. So you tell me who has more right to honor his memory. She hung up. The family pressure intensified. Relatives I barely knew called to beg me to let it go. Just let her come to the service, my cousin Melissa said. You're dividing the whole family. The family divided itself, I replied. I'm just refusing to pretend everything's fine. But it's causing so much pain. Good. Maybe pain will teach people that actions have consequences. That's harsh, Hannah. Is it? Where were all these peacekeepers when I was locked out of my father's funeral? Where was all this concern about family unity then? She had no answer. People wanted me to absorb the hurt quietly, to be the bigger person, to sacrifice my dignity for the sake of family harmony. But I'd learned something in those weeks. Peace that requires erasure isn't peace. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. The second memorial service was small. About 40 people gathered in the chapel on a Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the pews. My father's hiking friends shared stories about trails they'd conquered together. His woodworking students talked about his patience, his attention to detail, his generous spirit. His college roommate flew in from Colorado to speak about the young man he'd been, full of dreams and terrible jokes. I stood by the simple wooden casket and spoke without shaking. My father taught me that love is shown through presence, I said. Through showing up even when it's hard. Through staying even when it's easier to leave. He showed up for me my entire life. So today I'm showing up for him. People cried. Real tears, not polite sympathy. Afterward, we buried him under the oak trees at Greenwood Cemetery, Plot 47B, exactly where he wanted to be. The sun filtered through autumn leaves and birds sang, and it felt right. For the first time since his death, I felt like I could breathe. Aunt Patricia squeezed my hand. He's finally at peace, she said. So am I realized. 3 weeks after the burial, my mother tried to move his grave. She filed a petition with the cemetery, claiming emotional distress and family tradition and a dozen other reasons why the plot should be relocated to a different section. The cemetery denied her request. Ms. Hannah Whitmore is the registered plot owner, they informed her. Only she can authorize relocation. Then she tried to change the headstone I'd ordered. I'd chosen simple granite with his name, dates, and a quote from Thoreau he'd loved. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately. She wanted something else, something more appropriate, something that mentioned her. The monument company called me to confirm. We have a Mrs. Victoria Whitmore requesting changes to the order for Plot 47B. Deny the request, I said. The original order stands. Every path she tried led back to me. Every attempt at control bounced off the legal authority my father had given me. She couldn't move him, couldn't change him, couldn't erase him or reshape his memory to suit her narrative. For once in her life, she had no leverage. The shift in family dynamics was subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Relatives stopped automatically deferring to my mother's opinions, stopped asking her permission for family gatherings, stopped pretending her version of events was the only one that mattered. At Thanksgiving, Brianna hosted dinner and invited everyone, including me. When my mother objected to my presence, Brianna said simply, "You're both welcome. If you can't handle that, you don't have to come." My mother came. We didn't speak, but we were both there. At Christmas, James organized a gift exchange and made a point of including me in the family text chain. My mother tried to create a separate event. Only 3 people showed up to hers. Her authority cracked. Not because I'd attacked it directly, but because she'd abused it so thoroughly that people stopped believing in it. Power only works when people grant it willingly, when they trust it, when they believe the person wielding it deserves it. My mother had shattered that trust, not just with me, but with everyone who'd watched her lock her own daughter out of a funeral. And once trust breaks, it's almost impossible to repair. What she lost that day wasn't control. Not really. She lost her audience. She'd spent years building an image of herself as the responsible one, the mature adult, the person who made hard decisions for everyone's good. People had believed that image because they wanted to, because it was easier than questioning. But locking me out forced people to see the truth. Her responsibility was just control. Her maturity was just rigidity. Her hard decisions were just cruelty dressed up as necessity. Once they saw it, they couldn't unsee it. I didn't have to convince anyone of anything. I just had to exist, to refuse to disappear, to stand firm in my right to grieve my father. That was enough. My mother never apologized. She never called to acknowledge what she'd done or why it was wrong. She never admitted that blocking me from the funeral was cruel, that trying to cremate my father against his wishes was a betrayal, that attempting to erase my authority was one manipulation too far. She just moved on, acted like nothing had happened, like we'd simply had a disagreement that was now behind us. And I never chased her, never demanded the apology she wouldn't give, never tried to force reconciliation she didn't want. I let her go, because grief had taught me something clarity never had. You don't beg for your place in someone's life. Either you matter to them or you don't. Either they choose you or they don't. Begging doesn't change that. It just diminishes you. My father had chosen me. He'd given me authority over his final resting place because he trusted me, because he knew I'd honor his wishes even when it was hard. That trust meant more than my mother's approval ever could. I visit my father's grave every few weeks now. I bring flowers sometimes, or just sit on the bench nearby and tell him about my life. I got promoted at work. Senior logistics manager. The kind of position I'd been working toward for years. I started dating someone. Carefully, slowly. A man who respects my boundaries and doesn't expect me to make myself smaller. I reconnected with Brianna. We have lunch monthly and she brings her kids and we're building something real. James and I talk occasionally. It's cautious testing, but it's something. My mother and I exist in the same family but separate orbits. We're civil at gatherings. We don't discuss the past. It's not forgiveness. It's not reconciliation. It's just coexistence. And I'm okay with that, because standing on the ground my father trusted me with, looking at the headstone I chose, knowing his wishes were honored, I finally understand what he was trying to teach me all along. Your worth isn't determined by who claims you. It's determined by who you are when no one's watching. When I think back to that day at the church, standing locked out while my father's funeral happened without me, I don't feel the same crushing pain anymore. I feel clarity. My mother thought she was removing a problem. She thought by blocking me, she could control the narrative, make all the decisions, shape my father's death into whatever story she wanted to tell. She was wrong. She didn't remove a problem. She revealed her character. And in doing so, she gave me permission to stop pretending, stop performing, stop shrinking myself to fit into her version of family. She blocked me from the funeral, so I took ownership of everything that mattered. Not out of spite, not out of revenge, out of love, out of respect for a man who deserved better than to be cremated against his will by an ex-wife who valued convenience over truth. And then I walked away, lighter, freer, finally, completely, unerasably myself. My father once told me that the best inheritance isn't money or property. It's the courage to live deliberately, to choose your own path, to stand firm in your truth even when everyone tells you to sit down. He gave me that courage, and a burial plot, and final authority. I used all three, and I've never looked back.